Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the special board meeting of the Broward, North Broward Hospital District for Commissioners, November 29, 2017, 12 to 4. Bob, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Here.
Commissioner Urian?
Here.
Commissioner Robinson? Here. Commissioner Wellens?
Here.
Commissioner Klein?
Here.
Okay, thank you. Candidate interview for Vice President Compliance and Privacy Officer. So, do we have Cindy Morgan Kemp here? Hello?
Hi. Good afternoon. You want me to?
Yeah, please. You're in the hot chair.
Come to the front of the class.
You ever watch that program, The Voice? There you are. The difference is that we're looking at you now.
Great. Well, good afternoon, commissioners and members of management. Thank you for having me here and considering my interest in the Vice President of Compliance and Privacy position. It's really an honor and privilege to be considered for this position as Broward Health, as your organization serves a really critical mission, providing quality health care services to its community. As with any entity, the operational and reputational success in part depends on implementing and maintaining an effective compliance and ethics program that promotes adherence to applicable laws, rules, regulations, as well as developing a culture of compliance. Throughout my professional career in both private and the public sector, my experience has been devoted to compliance, investigations, and providing quality legal advice and guidance. I also started my professional career here in the Southern District of Florida as a federal law clerk managing a docket for civil and criminal matters. I later served as an assistant United States attorney in both the Miami and Fort Lauderdale offices, where I represented the United States in hundreds of grand jury investigations, tried over 24 cases to verdict, and specialized in white-collar prosecutions, including healthcare fraud matters. While I was a prosecutor, I handled cases resulting in deferred prosecution agreements or corporate integrity agreements for a variety of criminal matters, including false or fraudulent billing practices. As a result, I'm very familiar with corporate integrity agreements and understanding the components of complying with those necessary requirements. I moved on to later represent clients in the white-collar section in private practice and also worked in-house developing corporate compliance programs. Later, I was offered and assumed more significant management responsibilities, managing attorneys, investigators, auditors, administrative staff, as well as others outside my area of expertise, such as information technology or human resources. I have specific experience building and rebuilding compliance and ethics programs from both the ground up, as in my current role at Florida Atlantic University, where nothing was in place prior to my arrival, or rebuilding troubled or challenging programs, such as with my last position, which was with the Department of Commerce Office of Inspector General's office, which was plagued by internal complaints, whistleblower allegations, high turnover, low morale, lack of engagement, and oversight review by an independent government agency. I believe I have successfully navigated through those challenges in the past, and in my last position was promoted to taking on even further responsibilities more on the operational side. I also want to specify that I believe I have what I call the nuts and bolts of compliance experience, implementing all 7 elements of the federal sentencing guidelines, everything from developing policies and procedures, managing audits and risk assessments, developing and implementing training and awareness campaigns, managing hotlines or helplines, as various entities call it, working with human resources and senior management, and promoting consistent disciplinary action where appropriate, and responding to incidents and taking up follow-up action to prevent those actions from reoccurring again in the future. From a management perspective, I'm experienced and comfortable managing staff that directly report to me or indirectly report to me, or dealing with soft lines of reporting relationships. Really working with other areas, collaborating, being communicative with other areas that have either overlapping or consistent roles with compliance, such as legal, human resources, or internal audit. I think together we have, and demonstrated in the past, really work together towards the overall goal of ensuring effective lines of defense for an entity so that they could really go on with the business of successfully implementing its operations and serving its primary client base, which is really the purpose and goal, I think, of every organization or corporation. So aside from my professional experiences, which I sort of briefly highlighted, and I'd be happy to go into further in a little bit in answering specific questions that you may have, I want to express that it's always been meaningful and important to me to assume positions where I can contribute to the community in which I live. As a resident of Broward County, and someone that has spent her whole time, at least in the Southern District of Florida, working in the public sector or for the community, this opportunity is particularly special to me as it allows me to pursue an important personal value in the positions that I have assumed and ones that I have enjoyed in the past. And in sum, I submit that I have the experience to help Broward Health in its compliance and ethics program, as well as going back to the overall goal of improving its operations and delivering quality healthcare services to the community it serves. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have for me, or explain in greater detail any of my current or former experiences and how they relate to the role here.
Okay, who wants to go first? Commissioner Robinson.
Welcome, and I apologize for our being so tardy, but we actually ran over in our last meeting, and it's a little bit embarrassing that we're so far behind, but
Is that a nice way of saying it was my fault?
No,
It's my fault.
No, we also
Sorry.
wanted to eat a little bit because we knew it was going to be a very late night, but we're not going to skimp on the time that we're affording you just because we were less than totally efficient. But in any event, I've looked at I'm very impressed by your background, by the way. It jumped out at me with all of the experience that you had in the regulatory area. And even though I think in some respects your healthcare expertise has been the last couple of years, it certainly seems that it's been concentrated the last couple of years in things that you might come into contact here. But the skills that that you had to have achieved in all of these senior counsel positions and investigatory, and actually even serving as a clerk, serving in the U.S. Attorney's Office and even the firms that you clerked with and being a accusatory. From that background, I think it's actually right up the line of what I had originally anticipated that this position would be. My questions to you are to get into some specifics just with respect to, even though you were in the litigation side, there is a reference in here to your being involved in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale office of the Southern District, that you were involved in white-collar cases and investigations, including healthcare fraud. And I'd like to know a little bit about what those cases involved and what level, because it was pretty early in your career, but what level of experience you gained from that type of work.
Sure. And thank you, Commissioner, for your comments and kind words. I appreciate that. When I was with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida, like many prosecutors that start in the office, you have a 6 months or 1 year rotation, just handling general crimes and understanding, trial techniques, investigative techniques, grand juries, getting familiar with the various federal agencies that you work with and take on in terms of whether they present facts that warrant a prosecution to be presented and move forward later in court. While I was with After that period of time, I specialized and was moved into the Economic Crimes Unit, or the white collar section, both in the Miami and Fort Lauderdale offices. In that office, this was prior to, I believe, the creation, what I guess is now the Healthcare Enforcement Action Task Force. I believe it is that task force originated in 2009. My time with the U.S. Attorney's Office, I left in 2005, so it's prior to that. So those cases were allocated to the different prosecutors, including myself, in the white collar section of the U.S. Attorney's Office. And from those matters, we worked with various agencies, primarily the FBI and Health and Human Services, OIG, and other regulatory agencies in handling healthcare fraud matters. As with any other prosecution matter, we were presented with various facts, everything involved in evaluating the evidence, issuing subpoenas where warranted, whether the probable cause standard could be met, from up until putting together the facts, the investigative evidence in terms of an indictment, a formal indictment, interviewing witnesses before the grand jury, understanding cooperators and understanding the information they provide, reviewing medical records, information, other documents that are critical to making a prosecution decision, and then presenting and prosecuting those matters before various judges that are assigned in the Southern District. Prior to the formation of this task force, those matters were generally dispersed amongst our offices. I've handled matters regarding fraudulent or false billing practices, for billing fraudulently under the federal healthcare system for services that were either not provided or were not provided to the extent that they were billed for services for durable medical equipment, as well as other practices, and was involved in the resolution of those matters as well as the prosecution. And in terms of more recent, just to address your comments, Commissioner, on more recent healthcare experience, aside from my time with the U.S. Attorney's Office and when I was in private practice, also representing clients who were also part of healthcare investigations, were subject to healthcare investigations or oversight reviews. I also, in my current position, serve as the privacy officer for the university. We have covered components within our university, the College of Medicine, the College of Nursing, Student Health Services, and its pharmacies. As part of my incoming role with my current position, I developed essential policies and procedures that may or may not have been in place before my arrival there, made them publicly available. They are obviously met with key stakeholders in making sure that the policies and procedures, because I don't really believe in developing things in a vacuum, making sure that the key internal stakeholders understood, and I understood, sort of their practices, making sure that they were consistent with their practices in the clinics, taking into account their diverse practices, and putting those together, implementing formally training both in person and online as well, which is something that we did not have before, as well as work with, of course, other areas of the university which I've identified as high-risk areas, and just prioritizing sort of the needs and making sure that effective controls were in place.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Wells?
Yeah, welcome and thank you for taking the time. And I again also want to apologize. We didn't know that you were sitting there, and once we found out, we were all sort of embarrassed. So we apologize that it's not the way that we would like this to come off, but we do thank you for your patience. I got a couple of questions. So looking back at your resume, you've had a lot of pretty good opportunities, a lot of which were in DC, in different roles. Could you maybe walk me through, or walk the board through sort of how these opportunities came about? Because I mean, it seems like you were a year and a half, 2 years in each of these different stints. Are these things you sought out, or were you recommended to move to a different department for a particular, I'm just curious as the flow. And then the second part of my question is, what was FAU like from your perspective when you got there? And what's it like today? Have you accomplished all of the goals that you had when you walked into FAU? And obviously it's a growing institution. It's got a lot of people and places, and it's going all over. And I'm just curious as to, why you'd want to walk away from that opportunity that you built there. So if you could just walk me through the thought process there, that's all.
Sure, absolutely. And first of all, please don't apologize. I apologize if I was earlier intruded on your board meeting. I know that they are public, but I figured that it was better to be early in the event that you had time to squeeze me into your busy, it seems like, agenda and calendar today. So taking the first part of your question in terms of the experiences, my time here in the Southern District really just started from clerking. You are correct that most of my experiences are all in the Southern District of Florida or in the DC area. I actually, when I was clerking, I met my husband, who's still working for the same corporation located also in the Southern District of Florida, and ended up moving back to Florida shortly after I was in DC, and worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was my experiences in Florida, whether as a law clerk or as an AUSA, was a very fulfilling experience. I learned a lot, I gained a lot, very high-paced, high-energy environment, highly demanding environments, not unlike some of my more recent positions as well. I'm someone, I don't know if it's a personality flaw or not, that I do appreciate and enjoy challenges. I like to really learn from my environments. I like to give back, but I also like to feel like there's constant growth in terms of my personal and professional abilities, and that's very important to me. I moved, my husband had an opportunity to open up their DC office in 2005, and so I moved to the DC area, was in touch with some former colleagues that was with a law firm, and I ended up representing a number of individuals, mostly in security and accounting type fraud matters in DC. From there, one of the partners had departed, ended up going to the Hill, and asked if I was interested in the position. Actually, that entire white-collar group moved to another law firm. I was invited to move with them, but just was interested in this other opportunity, really, with developing ethics as well and compliance, and moved as well to there. From there, that was also a troubled institution. No ethics or compliance training that was really in place before. There's a lack of trust and transparency with issues, matters coming before members of Congress and their staff. We implemented a brand new, actually, ethics manual to better explain the, quite frankly, complicated travel and disclosure rules and campaign rules that affected individuals in a high-profile setting. I would say that was probably, though I managed cases, though I managed investigations while I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I came in at a senior counsel level with a law firm, that was probably my first larger management responsibility and role, where I managed an office of attorneys and investigators, as well as individuals providing advice and guidance. From there, the chairman actually promoted me as a chief counsel for another committee that he was working on, and I moved to that position. And then he ended up retiring, the chairman that I worked for. So one of the clients, actually at Kroll, that I had represented successfully in defending in securities fraud litigation, introduced me to a compliance position within Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation. They were in trouble with both them and a sister company had regulatory issues where they had to separate the compliance division for independence purposes primarily out of the legal division. It was part of the legal division, and they wanted greater independence and oversight. And so I took the opportunity and moved from there. Somebody that I had crossed paths with, actually at the U.S. Attorney's Office, was working in management at the Department of Commerce. And from there, they also had a very troubled and plagued, as I had described in my opening remarks to all of you, a very plagued and troubled compliance and ethics program, struggles with employee morale, high turnover, a lot of scrutiny and oversight from oversight entities, very difficult to manage the operations under that current environment. And I was brought in initially to address the compliance and ethics and manage that in a short period of time. I had a lot of help and support from senior management, but through really key engagement initiatives, rebuilding the program in that office, I think we successfully turned that ship around, made sure that it was productive. We went from literally second to last in terms of rankings, in terms of employee satisfaction and engagement, to, I'm not going to say that we're at the top, but at least in the top half of other agencies in a remarkably short period of time. We had, as I had mentioned before, a number of whistleblower allegations or internal complaints. So there was key management and senior management turnover. I think because the management trusted me and that we had successfully navigated through immediate compliance and ethics challenges, I was promoted to the Deputy Inspector General position, which is essentially serving as the Chief Operating Officer. There was a senior departure during my time, and there was no general counsel, and I assumed that role as well, a dual responsibility. And in that capacity, I certainly developed, just incredible, in my view, the opportunity for management experience outside even my areas of expertise, which is, what I consider legal counsel, compliance, investigations, audit. For example, our office had an office of auditors, and I'm not a CPA, I'm not an accountant, but I had the senior audit executive reporting to me in that role. We oversaw dozens of public audits and reviews. I worked with the audit division, senior audit reported to me in making sure that we held the operations accountable. It was a challenging position as there were 12 different bureaus in the Department of Commerce, over almost 50,000 employees, everything from having oversight responsibility from satellites, weather satellites, fisheries, the Census Bureau, minority businesses, census, patent and trademarks. We issued a number of our findings and public reports that still exist today, made recommendations to try to improve its operations and efficiency of those operations in those various bureaus through our work. And had, again, an opportunity really to come back to South Florida through really my husband and having additional promotional opportunities with, at headquarters. Florida Atlantic University, we talked about it, was something I was interested in because they did not have a compliance program. They've never had a chief compliance or ethics officer or privacy officer. It was a growth, as you all know from being part of this community, and as I gleaned when I was here last 15, 17 years ago in the Southern District, it was more of a commuter school with a smaller student population base. It's now over 30,000 students. It has a full Division I athletics program. It has a College of Medicine that's all developed within the last few years. And it was an opportunity for me to put into place an infrastructure, which I believe I have put in place, that was necessary. I've supported the Audit and Compliance Committee, which is who I report to, of the board, as well as the president. Dr. Kelly has been remarkable in turning the university around, as well as key management that have really been committed to improving the university, the education that it affords to its students. I know that he is very proud, as well as everyone in the university, of its achievement. And I think that the most critical areas to close and answer the second part of your question is that have been addressed in putting together and putting in place the effective and components of a compliance and ethics program. I think I've left it in a better state than where I found it, and I think that there's certainly more that anyone can also do, but I think that for me personally, it is serving the community in terms of its student body. But for me, I think my past experience is serving a larger community and purpose. I think it's nice to come into a program where you're building something from the ground up. But I'm attracted to challenges where, I feel like I could make an impact and make significant improvements to an existing state. And I think that Broward Health, at least the opportunity there, is more consistent with the challenges and the experiences that I've been attracted to in the past.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Yuri?
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Apologize.
That's okay. Impressive resume. It's unbelievable. I just have a couple, actually just one question. So we're in the healthcare hospital business. So it's from your experience here in FAU, how do you see yourself acclimating? Because acute care is very different. We have many challenges here, many opportunities. How do you see yourself coming in, acclimating to the hospital setting?
I think that, well, thank you for your comment, and I appreciate, how sensitive the environment is and the challenges, unique challenges in the hospital care setting. I think in my prior positions or in dealing with other entities, I have operated in environments not only that have experienced challenges, but that the individuals and the client or the customer base, really comes to, as I see here at Broward Health, to seek quality services in times where they're incredibly vulnerable, and being provided that quality health care is critical and is important. I think a lot of my skills translate into those environments. I've had to handle, whether it's in the past, prior victims of healthcare fraud, resulting in services or in terms of poor services or services that weren't provided, handling individuals that had lost their livelihoods or their savings as a result of decisions, sometimes purposeful and other times just negligent, of individuals navigating those types of relationships and issues, and we're trying to bring those to a resolution. I think that I think it's really an important purpose, which is why I think that compliance and ethics at a place, whether it's Broward Health or any other large institution that provides and is responsible for delivering community health care, it's so critical to make sure that people have trust and faith in its operations, that it's doing the right things in the right ways, that it's making those improvements, that it is abiding by and adhering to the applicable rules and regulations and policies, and creates and is part of that culture, and making sure that the overall mission and the overall goal is really what's focused on. And I hope that my experience and familiarity with just corporate integrity agreements, and I can only imagine, and I have imagined, the challenges of operating under that environment, can help bring Broward Health to a place where it's not so reactionary. And I don't mean to be judgmental with respect to Broward Health. I think it's with any entity, as I've certainly been on both sides of that. When you're under so much oversight, reporting requirements, I can imagine that it is very time-consuming, very onerous, expensive to meet all the compliance requirements, which are necessary. But to get to a place where it can focus on anticipating and identifying risks, getting ahead of issues, and being a little bit more proactive instead of just responding to just putting out fires, as I imagine that, at least in the initial stages, that is very much what's entailed. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but I think those skills and my background translate, and I could approach certainly this position with the requisite level of sensitivity and due care. Thank you.
You actually, yes, thank you. You actually hit on a subject that I was going to ask you about. I happen to also have spoken with our OIG monitor actually this morning. And this issue came up, that I brought it up about moving at some point in time from reactionary to being proactive. And, you know, it's certainly my hope, I believe, the hope of both our management as well as the rest of this board, that that this CIA process, which is onerous and time-consuming and expensive, will result in this organization being held out as an example of how embracing these types of challenges I guess my hope, I guess, is that we are an example in a positive way as to how operating under this supervision can have a benefit. But so where I'm going with that is one of the questions that I had brought up with Ms. Ellis was, what type of proactive things would we, or how can at least I educate myself on what proactive areas we would want to, focus on. So my question, as I had a very long intro, and I apologize, but my question would be, in the experiences that you've had, which you've had several, what would be the proactive things that would stick out from your career that would give something, since we don't necessarily have a hospital example, what would be some examples of proactive steps that you took to not just comply with the letter of the law, but to demonstrate a spirit of compliance in a way that proactively positioned the organization where you were?
So I think that in addition to just, and I agree with you 100%, because every entity wants to get away from just reacting to the problems and issues. And I think that by not putting in sort of the upfront work in terms of compliance, whether it's training and awareness, whether it's enhanced communication, making sure that those lines of communications to raise issues, questions, concerns, because I think for the most part, in any industry, most people want to do the right thing. They want to serve the organization. They want their organization to be successful. But sometimes there are not as a path to what is it that you want to achieve? How can we get there within the parameters of the laws and the rules and the policies in place? Let's talk about how we can get you there. And I think that those are the types of discussions and the dialogue that I've had in a number of the entities that I've worked for to build those lines of communications and trust, and so that when there are practices that people are thinking about implementing, to make sure that they receive full legal and compliance review, that we have those discussions, that they trust me, that the first thing I'm going to do is not shut that conversation down and say, no, you can't do that. Because as a compliance individual and as an attorney, I think the easiest thing you can say is, well, the answer is no. But and ultimately the answer may not be achievable, but by having that discussion, by understanding what business and management wants to achieve, you're able to brainstorm ways as to, again, within the bounds of the rules and the regulations, to try to get to different and implement different initiatives or actions that are permissible. And that's part of the process. I think it's very important, you can't control in any organization. Individual bad actors, what I'd like to say. You can put into place policies and controls to make sure that everyone is afforded the opportunity to understand what the expectations are, how to operate, and how to operate in a correct and effective manner. I think that's the responsibility of compliance, to make sure that you promote that culture, to make sure that that awareness is out there. And I have done that in terms of whether it's setting up workshops, making materials available, promoting online training and in-person training. The other aspect I think is very important is to working with other areas in terms of eliminating. I mean, you talk about being proactive, and in just even my current situation, just administrative controls that in this day, for example, with technology being as portable as it is and storing so much information that we can in small medium, that you really remove, it's not necessarily the temptation, but access when it's no longer necessary, it's no longer required. There are administrative controls and access requirements that you can work with, not to make one's job difficult, but to reduce the risk of a breach, reduce the risk of loss. And I think I've, at least in my current position, have really worked to try to address those issues. Talking completely outside of the healthcare world, I think that one area that was of risk in my current position was one involving athletics and issues involving, how to take a program that's not succeeding, working with management and putting into place the appropriate guidelines, again, making sure everyone that are, whether they're new employees or existing employees, abide by complicated NCAA requirements and rules and bylaws. And to make sure that that's explained, to make sure that it's transparent, and to provide the training when necessary, and to be available to provide that advice and guidance and set that framework in place.
Great, thank you. I guess my next question, maybe you could even say is a comment, I suppose. You had referenced, I guess, looking at different opportunities as where it interested you to move for a different challenge, and there's no doubt that this is a challenging position, but it's also one where having continuity is very important, not just for the obvious reasons, but specifically as it relates to the most immediate and pressing challenges that we face operating under a CIA. So, and I don't want this misconstrued, but in looking through your resume, there's been a number of changes, job changes, opportunity changes, and so on. So I want to understand, I guess, where the root of that movement is, as opposed to looking at this situation, and is this something that you would be looking at a commitment that would be, let's just say, more long-term. And so that's my sort of question, sort of comment, because that's ultimately what we're looking for, as a permanent person to be here for the long term.
So I would imagine that it would be very disruptive in year 2.5, I would imagine, of a corporate, of a CIA to have some level of transition there. I think for me, you're right, I have looked at and sought different opportunities, or taken advantage of different opportunities in terms of growth or greater management responsibilities. Ultimately, my time in South Florida is really where, is coming back to where I'm rooted. I think DC and the practice in DC is much more fluid. Whether it's the practice of law or compliance, I think there is a lot of movement. Maybe it's whether it's unique to me or individuals with my background. coming inside and out of private and public service is quite common. When I was in the Southern District of Florida and here as a prosecutor for 5 years, I really did enjoy the different challenges that the office afforded me. It's one of my best memories. I think it's because I felt very connected to not only my colleagues, my counterparts, but also the community as well. So sitting here today, I can't promise you how long whether I'm in my current position or a prospective future position I will be. But I do know that I feel like for the time that I am there, I am 100% engaged. I try to bring on, if there's a need to do that, employees that are engaged, that are really committed to improving the operations. They don't really treat it as a job. I can honestly say with respect to every position that I've ever had, I was not only fully immersed and very committed to it, but I really enjoyed each position and opportunity I had. And when I felt that the growth had stagnated or it was time to move on, I did so. I never left in a sense of saying like, well, why did I stay here at this extra time? And I think I worked in a work ethic manner that also reflected my level of engagement to the entities that I was a part of. I definitely look at a responsibility in terms of can't bar all these unforeseen possibilities or circumstances coming into place, but I would imagine that it would be in everyone's interest, including the candidates that apply to this position and the board and senior management, that the next chief compliance officer is one that stays at least through the course of the CIA. That's really important, and that would serve Broward Health, I believe. Beyond that, like you said, I think part of that process in hopefully following out the CIA is to put into place some proactive measures. So, it's a lot to take on, but in identifying the issues and problems, not only through the initial settlement, but I would imagine subsequent reviews or ongoing reviews that Broward Health has been subject to, it's really also an opportunity to identify better practices and improve its operations. And that's how I would absolutely see that and work with management to try to implement that as well.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Commissioner Williams?
I have two pretty short ones.
All right, so I have, you done?
I just have a couple of
Oh,
follow-up
Andy, I'm
questions.
sorry.
Thank you.
Commissioner Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of my questions have already been addressed, a lot of the subjects already covered, but I do have a couple of follow-up items. I moved to DC 17 years ago, and I still practice out of DC, so familiar with the legal environment there. And I think, based on your background, it is a pretty impressive background. And I understand moving on to the next challenge that does happen in DC, where another opportunity comes up to take on a new role at a new higher level. So I fully understand that. A couple of questions I have relate to the transferability of your experience, to the current challenges that are in place here. The first question I have, I guess, just relates to your current role at FAU. You mentioned there was no program in place when you came in. Have you completed implementation of everything you wanted to do there, or are there more items that you want to accomplish there in terms of putting in place a complete and comprehensive compliance and ethics program?
So I think that right now there is a compliance and ethics program in place that meets the critical elements of the sentencing guidelines, and I think in terms of whether an ideal situation or the best practices in terms of being held up as a standard, I think it will take time to get there. I don't think it's there yet. I think that I guess in sort of responding to another question that was presented to me, I think that, and who knows, there are no immediate plans for that in the future, and I don't want to speculate or create any rumors that that's going to happen, But if the college were part of a teaching hospital, I think there would be a greater opportunity, at least from my standpoint, to stay and to be a part of that really long term. I think for the university and for the risk areas that it has and the high risk areas that it has, I do believe that those risk areas have been addressed, and there are policies and procedures, training, communication lines that have been put in place. In terms of transferability of skills, I don't think that my experience is just on the government side of whether it was recommending or being a part or party to a corporate integrity agreement, or even when I was with an OIG, overseeing and making sure someone oversees part of the agreement and the implementation plan. I think that in other situations, I've worked and learned in not only different environments, but new areas of the law. For example, I think I had mentioned even the Department of Commerce with its vast jurisdiction, understanding issues that present itself in Census Bureau with sensitive information to some sort of defense information in international trade or with satellites and handling those matters, or just in terms of like fisheries or endangered species, and understanding and trying to understand it sufficiently so that you could provide value and oversight and compliance to those programs, as well as sophisticated mortgage products, whether it's at federal home loan mortgage corporations. And I think part of whether it's with the U.S. Attorney's Office or the law firms that I've worked for, was part of that training, as you probably can appreciate, of just really being a subject matter expert or becoming one in a short period of time to adequately and fairly and best represent your client. And I can't imagine that I would take any other additional approach if I were to have an opportunity in this setting.
No, I don't know if you know, I'm the newest commissioner here. I've been on the board just a couple of months now, and I'll ask you the same question folks ask me: why? Why would you want to come into this challenging environment? You understand it's a healthcare system in transition under the corporate integrity agreement. Compliance is obviously a central issue. You know, why would you want to leave the role that you have now and take on that very challenging role at this point in time?
So I don't think any of my professional opportunities have been driven necessarily by comfort. I don't know if that's more of a character flaw in me, but other than my family and my work, I mean, those are things that I'm really interested in and I'm passionate about. To answer your question of why, because it makes an impact. I think a lot of people can step into an environment that's fairly smooth, that's pretty consistent, and that's operating on its own. You're not really necessary. I don't necessarily know how much value any individual will really add into that or have an impact. And I think it's rewarding and meaningful from my perspective, and something that I had alluded to in the initial beginning, to be able to make an impact in an organization, and more specifically within the community in which you live and serve. And to me, that is, I think, I would imagine a rewarding part of this position, as well as all of your respective roles here, and why you would take on the challenges, I would imagine many more than just that face the compliance position, as to make a difference, to be a part of that change, to be that change agent, and to be something to have something that you're proud of your accomplishments and the contributions that you make, and it's something that the community really needs.
And at FAU, do you have staff working with you in your role, or are you really a team of one in compliance and ethics?
I have a staff working with me, and there are different areas that specialize. So, for example, there's staff within the covered components that handle certain issues that are raised. There's staff within the athletics department that handle NCAA. Of course, I'm involved in that, and there's either indirect or direct lines that report to me. In terms of eligibility, other determinations. There's an office that handles, at least in the college environment, Title IX issues, Title VII disability accommodations that also report to me.
What about the healthcare side with the College of Medicine, College of Nursing, Student Health Services? Do you handle that directly, or is there a direct report who oversees those aspects?
I handle those matters directly. I think ideally there should be a direct report in those areas. I think that right now it operates under affiliation agreements with 7 local hospitals in terms of its residency program. There are clinics that are active and at the university, both within the College of Medicine and with the College of Nursing, as well as a couple of other areas out of the College of Education that serve the general public. I do think that in terms of those matters as privacy issues, and we're working through certain challenges right now in terms of, as we become more sophisticated in terms of provisions, notice requirements that are necessary, processes that are important and crucial if we're going to engage in, let's say, taking some of the information that we have and engaging in fundraising efforts, for example, and working and navigating through those challenges. So to answer your question, we do have also a centralized information technology department that lends support to the different units, including the covered components as well, and that's critical. But I think there's an effort within the university, and that's not just unique, I think, to Florida Atlantic. I think it's for other universities to centralize the compliance function so that it's not as a siloed approach, that there's greater visibility as to issues that are presented before other areas of the university, and trying to really create and break down and have better lines of communication along those lines.
All right, thank you very much.
Go ahead.
I have 2 pretty quick questions. One, your top secret clearance with the DOD, was that while you were in Commerce Department?
It was when I was with the Commerce Department, and when I was with the Justice Department was, actually I've had 2 clearances, one with the FBI when I was with the Justice Department, and when I was on the Hill, and when I was in the Department of Commerce. It was the DOD that services the background investigations.
And are you currently members in good standing in California and the DC bars?
So I'm a member of good standing in the DC bar. California, I went inactive several years ago because of CLE requirements when I was here in the Southern District of Florida, because I was practicing in federal practice. There was an exemption for any CLE requirements for California, so I would be eligible for reinstatement.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, why not Florida? Florida was where all of your interests lie.
Well, Florida is unique in the sense that it's like California, a few states that you actually have to physically take the bar in Florida or California. And I think for me, there was a choice. I grew up in California at the time. I mean, looking back on it, I wish I had taken the Florida bar instead of the California if I could pick one. DC you could waive in based on scores.
As a follow-up to that, if you're not a member of the Florida bar and required to take CLE courses, how do you provide comfort that you've really kept up with the areas of the law that are important to this organization?
So in terms of CLE requirements, there are other educational or training requirements in organization, SCCE, ECOA, in terms of compliance officers, training and institutes, Alliance of Higher Learning conferences, leadership training that I'm a part of and that I have taken as part of my roles and responsibilities. I guess I could have listed those things there, and in terms of DC, it's really just picking one jurisdiction in which I am active and sit for. I don't know if the requirement is to take the Florida bar for this position. It wasn't a requirement at the time when I was in federal practice with the law firm, as a law clerk or with the U.S. Attorney's Office. So it just never came to pass.
That's it.
Well, anybody else? Thank you for being here. You were, by the way, I'll take the blame for all the delays and whatever goes wrong. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm the ultimate responsible here. This coveted job as chairman of the board. So let me say to you that you have a very, very, very impressive resume. And I think most of my colleagues touched up on everything that I wanted to ask, or just a couple of questions for you. If you were chosen, first of all, do you know anybody here?
No, I don't know anyone here. Full disclosure, I've never worked with anyone here. I have no financial interests with anyone here, as well as any of its subsidiaries or operations or with Broward Health.
Never saw us in the post office anywhere else?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, maybe the Publix or grocery store or
No former
Costco.
officers?
No
Anyway,
prior business relationships or personal relationships.
I do have a son at FAU. I don't think
Well,
that
my son is an FAU graduate, that makes two of us. I know we had something.
I haven't had the good fortune of mine graduating yet, but
I know you and I had something in common. Anyway,
And when I was with the U.S. Attorney's Office, all of those matters preceded any of the matters that are before the board as well.
thank you. If you were chosen, what would you do in the first 90 days, 90 to 120 days?
Well, a lot of information as part of that process is public, and which I've reviewed in terms of obviously the corporate integrity agreement and other subsequent reviews. What I would like to do is, within the first few days, I would like to meet with the key internal and external stakeholders to understand from that perspective of where things are, what the priorities are, and try to tackle those issues from there. I think it's important, and I would imagine, I say frustrating in terms of oftentimes when you have a settlement, I think the priority is making sure that you meet obviously the requirements of the CIA, so that there's no breach and there's full compliance of that, and that agreement expires and business can resume in terms of assuming after putting into place all the necessary controls and policies and infrastructure to prevent the original issues that occurred from reoccurring. But I also think that as part of the independent review process as well, there's additional information in terms of areas that may or may not be improved upon that needs to be considered. I think it's important to speak with key internal stakeholders that have institutional knowledge about the organization, about the hospital, about its administration, as to where the key challenges are, having to try to successfully navigate that, working with senior management and the board to tackling those challenges in a thoughtful way that makes sense to meet the strategic objectives also of the hospital as well. I think it is really, the first part is just to make sure that really the letter of the CIA, you're in a good position to meet those requirements, and then from there, additional issues that may need to be addressed to understand what they are and to take those challenges on as well and prioritize them. Some maybe are not ones that aren't necessary and aren't implemented, but to have that discussion and discourse to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Thank you. That's all my question. Thank you very much for, you want to do some summations or
Well,
Closing.
closing statements or however you lawyers call it?
So I appreciate that, and really I just appreciate your time here. From my brief early arrival here, I understand that you are really faced with a number of issues, and that your time is valuable. So it's not my intent to take any more of it here in speaking with you. I do want to, I guess, sum up by saying that I do believe I have the qualifications and experience to provide substantial change, to provide the requisite experience and level of expertise in navigating specifically through the current environment that faces Broward Health. As I mentioned before, from a personal perspective, the fact that it would also be serving the community in which I live and serve resonates with me on a personal level, and also the ability to make an impact is important. So I will say that no chief compliance officer can achieve a successful program without full support and resources from the board and senior management. And just the fact that you are devoting your time and as part of the process, I'm sure you're all committed to that endeavor as well. So I really want to thank you again for your time and your consideration today, and wish you the best of luck in the number of different items and agenda items that you will be taking on today and in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Cindy. Ladies and gents, you should.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So we have Cynthia Rome.
Correct.
Did I say it right?
Yeah.
Okay. To my right, I have Commissioner Klein, Commissioner Uri, Commissioner Wellens, and last but not least, Commissioner Boris. And I'm Rocky Rodriguez, and I'll be chairing the committee for today. So would you like to give us some opening remarks?
Sure. I'm glad to be here. Very excited. Looking forward to a great opportunity if I'm chosen. I figure you have a lot of questions for me on my background, so I guess we could start there.
Don't you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Sure.
So why don't you just kind of
Okay.
a prelude?
Sure. So I grew up in Connecticut, went to a prep school in Connecticut, and then I went to Tulane University down in New Orleans, and continued on to Loyola. While at Tulane, double majored in poli-sci and classics. So I've had like over 9 years of Latin and Greek. I love ancient languages. That's one of my hobbies. And then I went on to Loyola, graduated from law school, stayed in New Orleans for a year and a half, opened up a small private practice with someone I had attended law school with, and basically did general law, not anything exciting really towards car accidents, those kind of things. And then my mother became ill up in Connecticut, and I did not want to be away 1,500 miles away from my home. And I left and went to Connecticut and got a job in like 3 days working for Travelers insurance company. So that was my first entrance into the insurance company industry. And I worked under legal and regulatory affairs and was a compliance manager for their life and annuity products, and then went on to do major med, special risk, so all kinds of insurance they trained us on. And so I drafted all their group contracts and all their member certificates, filed them with the state insurance departments, and negotiated all those approvals, as well as did tracking of regulatory introductions to see what was going to impact their products. And that was really my first entrance into the compliance world. I did get recruited by Aetna, and I worked for Aetna for 10 years, doing similar functions at a higher level, but working more with pensions, annuities, securities. So I've had an exposure and a extensive base of knowledge and products. And then I got recruited again. It's the same recruiter keeps recruiting me over the years to Cigna. And I worked for Cigna, and there at Cigna is when I got into providers. So we had a huge provider base for their HMO and PPO contracts. They also had a very small Medicare, Medicaid unit. And so I served on their credentialing committees and worked with them on that. Also kept track of availability and applicability and, you know, anything having to do with provider groups, including their training. So I did that. I did take a transfer down to Florida to their dental vision division. And for me, it was, again, upward mobility, so a great move. And then at this point in time, I was their chief compliance officer down here in Sunrise, Florida for Cigna. And it was very similar to what I was doing up in Hartford. Same thing, working with a lot of the provider groups, but also I had a division of contract attorneys that contract drafted, same procedure, filed with the state insurance departments. You know, we created the dental office reference guides and again, dealt with negotiating contracts. And my supervisor actually had taken a role with Integra Health, which is really a vendor to insurance companies. And they were more on the Medicare, Medicaid line. They were a private equity group, and they were just starting up. And she called me one day and she said, you'd be really interested in the role I have for you, because it's heading up the compliance area, so it's developing and creating from the very beginning all their policy and procedures, all their HIPAA training, all their fraud, waste, and abuse. So all of that training, creation, disciplinary measures, doing all their privacy issues. So anytime there were any complaints, whether it was from the Attorney General, or it came from a member, or it came from the plan themselves, we started those investigations and responded as appropriate, you know, per our business associate agreements with the plans. Within the timetable, I also handled the security side. So I worked very closely with the chief security officer and, you know, handled all the NIST requirements and FINRA and all of those items, including setting up all their PMPs, their annual risk adjustment audits. And I'm proud to say that at Altegra, because we were so audited by the insurance companies and other divisions such as CMS or the Office of Civil Rights, we actually had accomplished and came out with an A score on 226 audits in 1 year. And that was handled by my division. So we had a very small group. It was only 7 people, but we managed everything. That included physical security. So how you badge in and out of the building, the cameras that are around, so making sure people didn't have their cell phones at their desks in the customer service areas, so they couldn't take photos of PHI or PII. So that's where I ended, because being with private equity, as you're probably aware, they flipped the companies in 5 years, and we did. And we had purchased and did mergers and acquisitions of about 7 entities that were $1 and $2 million. We flipped the company for $1 billion. And we became part of, it used to be called Endion. They changed their name to Change Healthcare out of Nashville. And I stayed with Change Healthcare for almost 2 years while we developed. They actually had taken my compliance tracking and mitigation scorecard that I had created for each division, where we met on a monthly basis and teased on key people what was going on, what they were doing, because our whole goal was to be proactive, to take care of items that we may uncover early on, because it's a lot better if you're doing something about them than having someone come in and say, you have an issue. After that, you know, working with Change Healthcare, I became part of their law department and compliance. I handled the compliance and legal function for all the Altegra divisions. That was about 5,000 people. After that point in time, craziest thing happened. They sold the company to McKesson. And I knew at that point in time, because McKesson was coming in with over 200 legal and compliance individuals, that they'd be looking to cut. And we actually had 5 cuts, and I was in the fifth cut. After that point in time, I've been doing consulting work, doing compliance and privacy for a small provider group up in Boca called Sage Dental. They have 59 offices in Georgia and Florida, and that's what I'm currently doing. So that's me.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams, you have a question?
So, when you took this new consulting role with Sage Dental,
What was Sage's compliance department makeup at the time you came in, and what have you done, let's say, to improve what they're doing? Obviously, they work across state lines, so you've got state and federal issues you're dealing with there. Kind of give us a brief outline of sort of what you're doing, what your
Sure.
impact has been, and where you think you are in that process. I'm just curious.
Sure. Excuse me. So when I came in, they had dental office policies and procedures. So, this is what you do if you're a hygienist. This is the safety. This is what you do with blood. So those type of operational P&Ps, they didn't have any for the home office. So I did the same thing I did for Altegra, is I instituted the P&Ps, the core P&Ps, the HIPAA training, the fraud, waste, and abuse training, the Stark Law, all those items, including responded to several complaints that they had that involved their offices or complaints from members that went to the state. Right now, they're getting into Medicaid, so that's a whole slew of federal rules coming out of CMS, what has to be posted in the reception areas. So that's the current project that I'm working on now, but basically it was creating their base policies.
Okay. And when you were with Altegra and some of your other roles, have you had experience managing compliance logs,
Yes.
investigations, tracking?
Yep.
So tell me what a typical day or month in terms of reviewing compliance logs, tell me the typical process that you would go through to
Sure.
manage that process.
So we had several entities that we work with, vendors that we worked with, including legal research, LexisNexis we used on topics. So every morning when I got in, I had all these emails that would have come in from the various entities, whether it was, the NAIC or, Lexis had pulled the things that I needed to review that applied to the products that I was interested in, including anything on HIPAA, if there were any updates on high tech, or, any new omnibus rules that were occurring. So we'd look at that. I had a scorecard, and I determined whether it was applicable, what we needed to do in order to comply, what the deadline was, what the step process was in which we were going to complete that, who was going to be the lead, and then the tracking. So every month we had a senior leadership meeting, and we went over key items that were, larger than, say, because they were national. So I may have one state that did one thing, but I brought more of the national high-level items that were across the board. Whether we had to update the business associate agreements, whether we had to do downstream review of entities, which for Medicaid, you're sharing PHI, you have to have oversight. So we made sure all those entities were in compliance with our PMPs, with what we were doing, our training, as well as they complied with what our health plans had requested in their contracts, because they get driven down. Because we were considered a first tier, and they were considered downstream. We also had to keep track of any subcontractors that they decided to use, whether they had their own training or they were offshoring, which we didn't allow. And then, of course, for any of the investigations, again, unless it was really a big issue, say there was something that occurred on the system, so a security breach. At that point, we might engage our forensics group to take a look for us, because those are things our IT can do some research and come down with what's going on, but it may not be as in-depth as we needed. So we would work with a forensic group. They were out of Washington, D.C. They also did searches for us on the deep web and the dark web. But any generic, like, privacy issue that may have come in the door, we handled ourselves. How we would start the investigation, we would bring together a very small team, very small. So the CEO would be part of that team, the CFO would be part of that team. Could be the head of sales might be part of that team, depending on what the issue is, because now we need to manage our clients. And we create an initial introduction that said, this is what we believe happened. We're still doing the investigation. We will be giving you weekly updates until we close this out. So that's really how we handled it. There was never a point in time that we had a corrective action. On some of our audits, we had some small corrective actions which we tracked, but on any of our privacy issues, we didn't. So that's how we managed investigations.
Okay, I just have one quick question.
Sure.
It could be a yes or no answer, depending. Have you had any experience with corporate integrity agreements, working in that environment with the Inspector General's Office, OIG?
Yes.
Okay, if you could just briefly share that, and then that's the last question I have.
So the OIG, obviously, we did all the background checks on a monthly basis because we had to. We dealt with the OIG if we found any issues on those. We also ran our database through a software program that intersected with the Department of Treasury and the OFAC database. I also dealt with many Attorney General complaints, because the type of work we were doing was assisting people get their Medicare and Medicaid benefits. And when you're dealing with an elderly population, they start questioning, they're asking me these questions over the phone, and I don't want to give them my information. We always gave them an opportunity that said, you don't have to tell us anything, but we want to help you. If they continued in the interview, then we would collect that information, create the application for them, submit it, and track it with the state Medicaid agencies. So we would get complaints. these people called me up, they keep calling me, even though we had gotten their names on feeds from our insurance plans to do an outreach to them on their behalf. And a lot of people were like, you know, this is fraud. So I spent a lot of time with the state attorney generals explaining why it was not.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Capasso is still calling.
That's okay. Hi. First of all,
Sorry.
Hi,
thank you for coming.
thank you.
As you know, the Broward Health comprises of 5 hospitals and many clinics, and I see there's the healthcare is more on the insurance side. How do you think you would acclimate to the hospital? And we are under a CIA as well, so tell me how, if this were to work out, you'd come in the healthcare setting is very different
Right.
from the insurance.
But all the settings I've been in have been different.
Okay.
So I moved from securities where I was working on blue sky laws and prospectuses to core insurance plans for companies and drafting contracts to a vendor who was doing nothing about insurance, was more about assisting people doing risk analytics. I just think I'm the type of person that picks up things quickly. When I was at Altegra, we also had home health care clinics. So they wanted to do this and go into this function, but there was no one there that had any background. So I literally created that whole division, which included getting all the licensing across all the states where we needed it, negotiating the contracts with the health plans who wanted to include it as part of their benefit, and dealing with all the providers, all the provider complaints, all the credentialing, all their licensing, all the location licensing, and some tough states like the state of Florida, where you have to have a healthcare clinic license on an annual basis, and it just isn't easy to document and get. You know, because basically the requirements are going to the very top of who the owners are, getting them to sign, getting their driver's license. I mean, you know, gathering information for applications. I did that because there wasn't anybody who was going to take that lead, and that was something they wanted to do. So I consider myself very chameleon. And I've worked in various positions in various industries. You know, I worked in banking and did asset retention. So, you know, it's just, for me, it's exciting and it's a challenge to continue to learn and to take on new things and to get to know new groups, how they operate, how they want you to operate, what's the culture. You're welcome.
Commissioner Robinson.
I have 3 questions.
Sure.
2 of them are very, very short. The first one is, when did you, it's hard for me to see the time frames that you were in all these various positions, and I don't want to go through all of them, but I would like to know, when were you last employed by Altegra?
Altegra, I started in October 2011. We sold the company in 2015. But that company entity, the name, the products, the compliance, the officers, all stayed in place until 2017 in May.
Okay, so you were with Change from 2015 to 2017.
Correct.
Okay, so you recently just left that position.
That is right.
Okay. And now, are you a member in good standing of the Bar of Louisiana?
Yes, I am.
But not Florida?
No. Well, because most of my function had nothing to do with legal. I know that, you know, compliance can be defined as anything, but.
Right. And my final question is just out of total ignorance on my part. Thank you for putting the definitions of all these various designations. And so I know what they say, but I haven't a clue what they mean. The Six Sigma process improvement, all these different belts, yellow belts.
Yep.
I don't have a clue what that means.
So Six Sigma was actually created by General Electric probably about 10 years ago. I mean, it came from Japan. And it's a process of how you learn to look at processes and get rid of non-value added steps. If you're having an issue, for instance, on turnaround time on complaints, you could take those over a month or 3-month period of time. You can look at them. You could put them on pie charts. They have all kinds of charts, histograms, whatever you want. And then you can start seeing when they grow and when they decline. Then you can start zero in on why they grow and decline and how much savings you can get at the end of the day by fixing the issue.
So it's an efficiency model.
It is an efficiency model.
What are the various belt designations within those models?
So the yellow belt is just a beginning belt of what, your generic population. It's more of an introduction. They would work on teams with the green belt. The green belt runs the team, facilitates what the next steps are, creates the whiteboard for everybody to show what they need to look at, where to go, how to do it. And the blue belt is really for your key management who need to have some exposure to what it is, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are approving those plans. And I know I've saved millions of dollars annually for different companies. In fact, I just saved Sage Dental money on a project.
So who makes the designations of where you are in that methodology?
Well, it's definitely Six Sigma. Six Sigma is an organization. They have what they call black belts and master black belts. They're the ones that would train and manage the teams for various companies. And you can move on to other belts.
So is that an organization of professionals?
Yes.
Consultants?
Yes.
Everybody else knew that, but just not me. You did. Well, I never heard of it, so everybody else knew about it?
Well, I knew Dr. Elsenati was very much involved with all that stuff.
Well, okay then, so I'm the ignorant one.
Jack Welch was the guy that sort of introduced it to the United States.
Well, there you
When
go.
you were in GE,
Okay, well, so there's my learning curve there. And it seemed like there was another one that intrigued me, but I can't, it's not jumping out at me now. Okay, I'm okay.
All right, Commissioner Klein?
Actually, the questions I had were already covered.
Is that where you were being?
I think
Okay.
there's some things you guys don't
Commissioner
know.
Yuri?
I just had one area that we didn't, at least I didn't hear focused
Sure.
on. One of the things that I believe this board, but certainly this organization would like to, at the conclusion of this CIA process, is to transform from a reactionary state to a proactive state and manage outside of the four corners of the corporate integrity agreement into more of a spirit of compliance and a culture of compliance. So what I'd be interested in is how certain experiences that you may have had would fit into that proactive model.
Sure. So let's just go to the what I consider the simple basics culture of compliance, which is posting the 800 number of your compliance 800 line, your ethics line, having compliance week, because you have to have everybody involved in that. You have to have people comfortable to come to talk to you when they need to. They should already know by the training it's non-retaliatory, but that's how you would start. You have to start from the bottom up. You need the top down to support it, but then support from the bottom up. Now, getting to be proactive, the only way I've found to do that, and there may be other ways, is to get to know the businesses, the divisions, the processes, and how things are being managed today, in order to analyze those and understand what is it we can do better. What are the issues that we've had? I'm sure you have, your top 3 issues that come out of either complaints or privacy or, those items. That's where to attack first, would be those items with the largest percentage of issues.
Do you know any one of us?
No,
Haven't seen us anywhere?
no.
Good. I just got a couple of questions here. What would you do in the first 90 days?
Well, I was going to ask you that. What would make me a successful candidate in the first 90 days? Like,
You're still here.
right, you're still here. I thought that making me wait was a test of my patience today, but I'm only joking.
No, that's,
I'm not joking.
But I mean, it's really getting to know everybody, getting under what you have and where you want to go. I could bridge the gap, but I need to know where you want to go.
Okay, I have one more question. You mentioned that you had a lot of vendors. My question to you is, do you have a workforce when you were a compliance officer? Or was it just you as a director and using the vendors? And there's a reason why.
No, we actually had, depending on which role I was, because I went from 15 people to 40 people to 10 people. So I always had a team. I've tried to handle these subcontractors myself because I feel it's extremely important, not that it takes more importance over anything else. It's just watching that is more important and more detailed than you would watching inside your building. So I created the plan. I did shift it towards the end to another individual as a compliance director in my area. I mean, we also had compliance specialists that would assist, but there was a lot to do with respect to that, including putting out newsletters to these subcontractors to remind them, hey, we're here for you, here's where you can contact us. If you need training, let us know, we'll help you. If you need to understand this, we'll help you. Because at the end of the day, our audits started to focus on the subcontractors, who we were using, why we were using them, what function they performed, what was the extent of the PHI we shared with them, and whether they had processes in place to make them compliant.
So where I'm going with this question is did you farm out most of the work, or did you do most of the work in-house?
No, we did all the work in-house.
Okay.
We farmed out none. And we also, they kept our team very small because, small companies keep small teams because that's the goal, in earning money. And we worked a lot of hours and handled a lot of items. So I multitasked incredibly.
Well, thank you. Is anybody else?
You're welcome.
Anybody else has any other question? Would you like to give us your closing statements?
Oh, sure. I appreciate you having me today. As you could tell, I like to talk about myself. I'm very interested in the role. It would be, again, a learning experience for me, a growth experience for me, and that's what I look for. You guys have a great organization. You have a great reputation in the industry. I would like to be part of a hospital setting. It's something new for me. And that's what I've continued to do in my upward mobility, was expand my knowledge base. I could probably be a professional student if someone told me I could continue to go to school, but I appreciate your time. I want to be respectful of that. And if you have any other questions for me, I'd be more than happy to respond to those now or later. But that's really it. I think I have a great idea of what you're looking for in a candidate.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to come and see us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, you ready to go, everybody?
Yep. Just state your name for the record. Nicholas Hartfield.
No, ready.
Ready to raise my right hand.
You're good. All right, so we have Nick Hartfield, so last interview. So Mr. Hartfield, would you like to give us an opening statement, please?
Sure. Well, my name's Nicholas Hartfield. I work here for Broward Health. I'm currently the interim chief compliance officer for the district. I have been for the last little over a year at this point. Prior to that, I was at Jackson Health System as the director of auditing, monitoring, and investigations. Prior to that, I worked at the Jefferson Parish Office of Inspector General as a special agent in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. Prior to that, I worked with Safeguard Services, who is the federal zone program integrity contractor for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So we did fraud, waste, and abuse investigations for Medicare and Medicaid fraud in the state of Florida. And prior to that, I worked for Humana Health Insurance Company as a supervisor in their special investigations unit. Since my career started at Humana, I've had 10 plus years of experience in all with healthcare, other than the time at Jefferson Parish where it was a mixture of everything. But everything else in my resume is all healthcare experience related and really kind of relates to compliance and with federal laws and regulations, state laws and regulations in some form or fashion in pretty much every job.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it.
Start with Ms. Capasso. You have some questions?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for coming here and interviewing with us. As the interim chief compliance officer, tell me what you think has been your greatest challenge and how you've approached it.
The greatest challenge as the interim chief compliance officer, I feel, has been the turnover within the district. As when I was coming in, it really did. The compliance department when I came in, even though we have a lot of good people that were working very hard, was was in a hole. And digging out of that hole has been one of the biggest challenges. I feel now in dealing with it, I deal with it by communicating with the Board of Commissioners here. I deal with it by communicating with senior leadership and working closely with them, and really trying to give a good give and take on how we can solve some of the issues that we have here at Broward Health, and what's the best way to go about it, and getting input from as many people as possible. And then even once we implement things, continuously looking at those as we implement them to see if we can make any changes to make things more efficient. Once the people on the ground, because we're, at least from my perspective, I'm, sometimes I'm sitting up there at 1,000 feet, and I may not completely understand how something we implement is going to affect the clinicians in the hospital, and getting that feedback after we implement changes, to see if there are things that we can do to make things better, to make things easier while still meeting all the requirements of our corporate integrity agreement, meeting all the requirements of federal or state regulations. I feel that it really is just working together and communication and being open to feedback.
Anything else from you? Commissioner Wallace.
Okay, all right. Me? Okay. Thank you, and sorry about the delay. We got hung up a little early, so your interview's a little later, but that's okay. We're paying you, so I don't feel so bad.
Yeah, it's not a problem. I'm here no matter what.
I'm sure you had plenty of work to do.
Yes.
Couple of questions. So, you came into this role because you were asked to do it.
Correct.
Your background wasn't as the compliance officer. You came from, but you came into it under very difficult circumstances, and we were already into a corporate integrity agreement.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn from that experience of taking over that department under a corporate integrity agreement that you think is going to help not only you and your team, but help the district going forward in terms of policies, procedures, processes? I mean, what are they? And I don't want all. What are the highlights of the things that you've learned that you think have made an impact on the organization and maybe is going to drive us to a much better compliant organization going forward?
Sure. Well, I think it even goes back to somewhat of my answer last time. It's just really what I learned is how much connectivity there is within a system this large, and working with all the different areas to get their input on things in regards to policies and procedures and processes, and how we're going to improve those. Also, one of the things that I learned stepping into this role is just, the massive amount of work that was ahead of me and still is ahead of Broward Health, no matter who's sitting in that office. And learning how the best way to organize and prioritize that work, and knowing that we can't get everything done at once, but trying to figure out, well, what are the true priorities, where they are, and then who in the system that we need to work with to ensure that we can get those policies and procedures updated if need be, or implemented if they don't exist, and then working with all the different areas of internal audit, HR, everyone, in improving the processes that we have in place.
Okay. Just a couple of questions.
Sure.
How big is your team? Do you have the resources that you think are reasonable for an organization this size? I mean, what would you do different in a perfect world?
In a perfect world, I mean, right now I would, and I've already reorged the department a little bit since being in there. I think a reorganization needs to occur a little bit more. We've added an additional 2 spots, but we do have openings. So right now, do we have the absolute amount of resources that we need? No, but has Broward Health given us those resources? Yes. I mean, we're just looking for people to fill those spots. It's not that I feel that I need more bodies or more spots, more positions, but we just need to fill the positions that we have open. And then I think by what I've done already with reorganizing the department, And because at the top, it was very just kind of flat. It was just everybody, or at the bottom, it was just kind of flat. There was everyone underneath, and then it just the director, and then chief compliance officer. Everyone reported up through the director. And that's just the varied amount of work that we do. That's just, it's not reasonable for one person to be over all the different, and have those expertise in all the different areas that we look into. So when I came in as interim, I changed the structure to where now we have 2 directors, and to where one will be more focused on the hospital compliance side of things. The hospital compliance officers will report up to that director. The senior privacy person will report up to that director, and then the other director will focus on kind of the CIA requirements, right? The focus arrangement requirements, the review of the focus arrangements, but then also has that background in billing and coding, and of all the audits that we do. So instead of the auditors reporting up through the first director, the auditors are now reporting up through the director who has more of that expertise to kind of allow us to do that. And we've been able to add positions in regards to a tracking remuneration manager position that we have, that we're currently filling, and also approved in the budget for this year was an additional hospital compliance officer position, or a regional compliance manager, to provide oversight for kind of the ancillary areas, because that seemed to be a weakness when I came into the compliance department. The hospitals had one, but we have a lot more than just hospitals here. And there really wasn't one for, Gold Coast, the physician group, all urgent care centers. There wasn't someone for them to go to. So that was approved within the budget for this year for an additional physician to kind of to meet that need.
Okay, thank you very much.
Commissioner Gordon?
I feel like I've been interviewing Mr. Hartfield all year.
Sometimes I felt like that too.
I'm sorry. Because of being head of compliance of the committee, I've really worked more closely with him, I think, than many of us. But and most of the questions that I would have for him, I have already asked and had answered, except in focusing on parts of his resume that I was unaware of. Probably should have been, but the experience with the ZPEC audits and the experience, it looks like to me when I go through your resume and the progress of it, from the investigatory side of it to the audit side of it, it seems like a natural progression because you kind of know where to look for things. I mean, not to be so blunt about it, but you know where things might or might not be hidden. So you can ask the right questions, assuming you've got honesty and you've got staff to help you go down those roads. But I'm curious, having been on the other side of some of these ZPEC audits, or trying to figure out what in the hell went on there.
Sure.
Can you explain why they're so far behind when they audit? What is the, I mean, I got, it's been a long time, but a case where the audit was 5 years old.
Yeah.
And to try to, from the other side of the table, figure out what happened, it's very difficult because people have left,
Yeah.
people have changed, and the contractor, if you will,
Sure.
whoever is that zone's contractor, has a lot of information that I couldn't get. So
Right.
is it just government backlog, like the IRS audit delays, or is it?
Sometimes, I mean, it's with the ZPIC, you work with a lot of other contractors as well. So like here in Florida, Safeguard is the ZPIC, but then you have First Coast Service Options, who is the fiscal intermediary, or MAC. A lot of the audits we do, when those demands for money go out, it's not from the ZPIC, it's from First Coast Service Options. So, there generally is a little bit of a backlog at the ZPIC just because of the volume of work, right? So just all the calls that you get received from Medicare beneficiaries, making allegations, to the proactive work that's done by the ZPIC in regards to projects. You have a little bit of a delay at the ZPIC, but then also once you send it over to First Coast Service Options, you're kind of at the mercy of them as well, right? So the ZPIC may have sent it to the First Coast Service Options shortly after they completed their audit, and then by the time First Coast gets around to sending out the demand for money, there could be quite a bit of time in between.
And when your client gets the notice of the demand for money for you to try to gather the facts,
Right.
it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, because that was always the biggest thing at the ZPIC was our relationship with the MAC. Because sometimes the actions that the ZPIC were taken were contrary to the business interests of the MAC, as you know, given how they're paid from the government. So if we were suspending providers, stuff like that.
So that's probably one of the reasons you can be so patient with this regulatory stuff, with our investigations. You've been on
Sure.
the other side of it, you understand what they're looking
And
at.
I do, and when we found, you know, evidence of possible criminal wrongdoing, I mean, I understand the patience of working with the OIG and FBI and other federal or state law enforcement agencies in that no matter how much of a slam dunk I think it may be, right, it can take quite a while for them to take it up, even when I've sat across from a table from an agent, and they've agreed completely that, oh, this is great, we got it. You know, they got to go back and redo all the work. They have, and then they got to get a U.S. attorney that's interested in doing anything, you know, and then priorities on their end. So I mean, it's patience, and I learned a lot of that, even with Humana, dealing with state and federal agencies and referring work. But it's a lot of patience, and
Or just in the bureaucracy within that organization, having been there too, so.
Yeah.
It takes a lot.
it does.
I only have one other question. and I'll
Go ahead.
With respect to the positions that have already been identified that you need to fill, are there individuals within the organization that you think might be a fit for that or might be interested in that? Are these-
There is one person, so for one of the positions, we have identified someone internally to fill that role, and I'm working with HR in doing that. And then all the other positions are posted just like any other position for Broward Health, and it's out there and advertised and available to anyone who wishes to apply. You know, we would always look at it based on the merit of their qualifications.
And are all those positions that you're aware of actually posted now?
Except for one that was recently vacated, so we're working with HR to post that, but everything else is, yes.
Because I think in the past, and I haven't heard a lot about it at all since you've been on board, Peter, is that there were periods where we thought on the board that positions had been posted and they had not been posted. So given the fact that we're trying to get things up to date and things done on time, knowing that everybody's got a lot of work to do and sometimes things will slip, it's important to get those things posted and to make sure that we get the very best people that
Yeah, that's never been my experience with in my dealing with human resources here.
Okay.
So they've always been very, the woman that I deal with in human resources has always been very prompt and very helpful, and even helping me get positions posted elsewhere other than just our website,
Wow.
right? To draw in those, to get as many eyes as we possibly can on our postings to ensure we're getting qualified candidates from not just here, but from anywhere
Right.
that would meet the qualifications.
Great.
Okay, Commissioner Klein?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nick, for coming in and speaking with us about this. I wasn't aware of your investigatory experience, and one of the questions I have is how that experience is helpful in your current role. I mean, how does that lend itself to the compliance and enforcement type role that you're in now?
Well, I think it helps me in multiple ways. So it helps in the fact that I have that experience of getting an issue, right, or an allegation, and then trying to figure out what are the rules and regulations regarding that, digging through all the federal regulations, the guidance, the state laws, and the state, you know, any guidance from them. Because, you know, in the past, you know, as you start, somebody makes an allegation, one, you got to figure out even if the allegation is true, or they're breaking any rules or regulations, you know, before even moving forward. And I feel in the compliance department, that really is a big component of the job in the compliance department, not just the chief compliance officer, but really anyone in the compliance department is being able to research and being able to understand the rules and regulations and to even know what to look for. Because if you can't get to that point, then it doesn't matter how good your interview skills are or how much information you get. If you don't know what you're looking for, you'll never find it. Or if you don't know what the rules are surrounding whatever the allegation or issue is, when you're analyzing all that information or speaking with someone to gather information, you won't know whether what they're saying makes sense or doesn't make sense, or what you're reading makes sense or doesn't make sense. So I feel that's prepared me, that that's been a big component of this job, is knowing that. And also, even with the investigatory background, I learned long ago, I'm not an expert in everything, right? We had, in every place I worked at, we had a lot of resources that we could go to, and that people that were experts in those areas. And we have that same thing here at Broward Health, right? We have a lot of people here that work here that have very varied backgrounds and have experience in a lot of different things, and it's being able to identify who those people are and who to go to for issues to get that guidance on things, to where I can sit down and look at something and think this is where we need to go, these are the rules, but we have those experts here at Broward Health, and relying on those and to get that input from those people that are those experts to ensure that we are looking in the right direction. I'm not misinterpreting something, I'm not missing something. I mean, we have a lot of resources here. And then I think it's helped me in a long way of having a lot of experience from sitting across the table from someone and hearing them talk and being able to, I feel I've become a pretty good judge of being able to pick up when someone's may not be completely forthcoming. And
That never happened in Louisiana though, right?
No, or here, in Miami when we were doing Medicare fraud investigations. But I feel I've become a good judge of that, and I think that helps in a variety of ways, and not just when I'm investigating an issue or participating in an investigation with staff or guiding staff on what to do. It's just when someone, just in meetings, right? It really has helped me be able to pick up on little things that just don't make sense, and be comfortable in pushing back on when those things don't make sense, right? And asking further questions to try to really drill down to what the issue is.
Now, you've been here a couple of years, with the organization. I wanted to pick up on something you were talking about as well, which is the organization and the resources within compliance. Obviously, compliance is an important aspect of what we're doing these days. We're obviously under an obligation to do it, but even regardless of that, it's an important aspect of what we need to do here at Broward Health. So in terms of looking at the compliance structure in the organization, you mentioned you've been reorganizing and adding resources and dividing up responsibility. Is there anything further now that you've thought about in terms of perhaps dividing up responsibilities further, or separating out some of the current responsibilities that you may have into a separate person? Is there anything of that nature that you think might be helpful, in terms of reorganizing or refining the compliance structure, organization, or resources?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that we have some positions within the department right now that would be better merged together. An example of that is we have like a senior training specialist that the position's currently vacant. But what I think is, so we have someone doing training, and then we have someone else who's over policies. As an example, to me that doesn't make sense, because they go hand in hand, right? So that senior training specialist should be handling our policies as well, right? Because whoever's out there doing training on behalf of compliance needs to have an understanding of why policies were updated, why policies were implemented. They should be in that process from the beginning, so that they have a better understanding of why things were changed, why decisions were made, so when they get questions during training, they're much more knowledgeable about it, instead of just reading off a PowerPoint, right? And then if someone asks a question and it's not on the PowerPoint, they really don't have that, advanced knowledge of that subject. So I think that's one position that I want to look to expand the job description of, right? Of adding that responsibility of policies. I think there's a couple layers in between the audit and director that really isn't, I'm not sure that is really needed now that we've split the director roles, right? So I understood why it was there when you just had one director,
But now that we have 2 directors, I'm not sure that we really need a manager in between the director and the audit team, right? I think it may be better served to take that position and get more auditors to be able to do more proactive reviews to ensure that we're meeting billing and coding requirements. So I'm still looking at a lot of those areas. And then also even within the focus arrangement team, again, I'm not quite sure if we need a manager's position in between the directors and the focus arrangement specialists.
Now, at this point, are you still wearing the hat of the Director of Focus Arrangements?
No. So technically in the system, I'm still in the Director of Focus Arrangements serving in this position interim, but the Manager of Focus Arrangements stepped up when I took this position to take over the Director's role on an interim basis.
Okay, so right now, you mentioned we have 2 directors, and
Yeah.
both of those directorships are filled?
No, one is vacant.
Which one of the 2, hospital or the?
The hospital.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So that
let me ask
person
you-
left a few months ago.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. In terms of, your knowledge and experience, obviously we're interviewing other folks for the position. What would be the challenges that you would see of someone coming in fresh to the position versus what you already know having been here?
I think one of the challenges is just the history of the organization. I mean, I think that's something that I bring that other candidates can't, especially given the fact that we're under a corporate integrity agreement right now and all the work that's been done up to this point. Personally, I feel the relationships that I've built with our OIG monitor, not to say someone can't step in and build that relationship, but I feel I've established that relationship. I feel I have her trust. I feel that she believes that what I tell her is the truth, and it is the truth, right? Good or bad or otherwise, it's where we're at. And I understand that if it's bad, then we'll talk and we'll work it out and figure a way forward. So I think that would probably be one of the biggest challenges for someone stepping into this role, would be just of all the historical of how we've gotten to where we're at now, and stepping into that.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Ewing?
So the other 2 interviews, the question was, why do you want to come into this job as an outsider looking in? I think the question is a little different for you. Somebody who's inside, who's already functioning in this role, why do you want to stay?
Yeah. Well, and to be completely honest with everyone sitting in front of me, I was very hesitant at the beginning to step in on an interim basis, given all that was swirling around the organization at that time. But I really, to be honest, I mean, I really enjoy doing this job, and I am shocked at how that I do enjoy doing it. But I really do enjoy doing the job, and I really want to see it through. And that's why I applied for this position. I think it's an excellent opportunity for myself, and I really want to see it through to the end of this corporate integrity agreement and beyond. I think that there's a massive amount of opportunities here at Broward Health, and the way the organization is going right now, I do see a very good future for Broward Health in meeting the requirements of the CIA and putting the organization at the end of this 5-year period in a much better position to succeed in the future.
That actually kind of rolls into my second question. You had mentioned when you took over the position, let's just say you were a little behind the 8 ball in a number of ways. Should you at any point in time, should you get this position, be presented with another opportunity that for one reason or another is something that you just have to jump for, which we all obviously understand. How would you say you have left things in your department in compliance to make that next transition, should that ever occur, considerably more efficient and smooth?
Well, and I think there's steps that I've done and there's steps that we're still taking to make that, transition smoother. But I think some of the things that we've done to hopefully make that transition, if it should ever occur in the future, smoother for the next person, would be that we now have processes more in place, right? And practices down. We're digging out of the backlog that was there. So hopefully the next person that takes over will not have to deal with that. And then I think with the reorganization that was done with the department, the positions that were added, if I can continue to refine it into a little bit better organized than it is now, I think hopefully we'll make the job, because that's what I want for whoever comes in after me. I want it to be as smooth as transition as possible, and really they're just there to, they would come in and hopefully just fine tune it instead of having to make major overhauls.
And then finally, this is something you and I've already talked about, but I think it would be beneficial, since I asked other folks earlier, for my colleagues to hear. But it's the concept of moving this organization from a reactive state to a proactive state as it relates primarily in this situation to compliance. And I guess the goal of moving beyond the four corners of a CIA to that culture of compliance, and just that spirit of compliance. And I just would be curious what either things that you have done, things that you have identified, and how you would put that into practice.
Right. So I think some of the ways that I've put that into practice is with the executive compliance work group that we have internally. We've expanded the membership of that to include additional departments that we felt were relevant. We're required to meet quarterly. We've been meeting monthly for most months. So that way everybody, we get together as much as we can, and that's all the senior leaders from most departments within Broward Health, talking about compliance concerns, talking about issues they see coming down, talking about risks that they see for the organization, and then trying to come up with a plan for how to deal with that, not just compliance, but all the departments involved. So in putting that, I think in meeting more regularly, that's helped become more proactive. Again, with trying to reorg the department to maybe take the manager's position and bring in some more auditors, so that way we can be more proactive instead of responding to, we think we might be billing this claim incorrectly, so then we go and look and reacting to that. We're proactively looking at what and we do this now in our work plan of what the OIG's working on for the year, right, in their annual work plan, trying to be proactive in that regards, and putting those items that would apply to Broward Health on our work plan for the year to ensure that that we've already, if the OIG does come in here and ask, if we're included in a national sample or anything like that, we've already taken a look at it. And if we've had any issues, we've addressed the issues, we've put corrective actions in place, or we can tell the OIG we already took a look at it and we're good. So I think it's bringing in, maybe an additional auditor to be able to expand on that, and then also with the addition of another hospital compliance officer, being able to look at different areas that are risk areas for Broward Health to ensure that those areas are compliant, and if not, getting everything corrected before it becomes a problem.
Great. Thank you.
I'm not going to ask you if you know any one of us, because I'm trying to stay with the same question.
Right.
So nor I'm going to ask you what would you do in the first 120 days, because we pretty much know that you will hit the ground running.
Yeah, I did the annual report, I think, in the first.
Anyway, I know how it feels to glutton for punishment.
Yeah.
So, a lot of us are in the same boat.
Yeah.
We love what we do, and it's a real painful road. But somebody's got to do it,
Sometimes.
right?
Yep.
So anyway, but I'm going to ask you, adding this, you mentioned that you got one position filled and you're looking for another position.
Yeah.
Right. So by staying in compliance, I assume that we save a lot of money from being penalized by the federal government.
Correct.
Correct.
And then also it plays havoc with budgets.
Right.
Right? So it makes Alan's job much more difficult when I got to go to him and say, look, we found an issue, we're going to have to repay, $1 million this year because of this. Right? So if we're in compliant, it makes budgets a lot easier as well.
So by adding all, these folks, you say, how can you reduce the amount of work? Because I don't know how much work we're farming out or how much you're doing in-house. Is that the goal to eventually?
I mean, we do most in-house. Yeah, we don't really farm work out.
Okay.
What we do is we utilize the resources that we have within Broward Health. Really, the only work that we have that we have like contractors to do is the ineligible person screening that we're required to do monthly for all our employees and covered persons. I mean, all our medical staff members, that's, over 10,000 people a month that we're screening. So I can't have one person sitting there typing 10,000 names into a system. So, I mean, we do have a vendor that does that for us, to where we send those lists out to them every month. They do the checks. They send us a report back saying, if any names came up, and then we work with the relevant areas to try to rule those people out. But other than that, we don't have any, in the compliance department, we don't have any vendors or contractors that are doing work on our behalf. Everything is done in-house. And then, but then also, if an issue isn't a compliance issue, human resources may deal with it. Quality may deal with it. If it's a legal issue, it would go to the general counsel's office. If it's an ethics issue, it goes to the chief ethics officer. So the work that we do is not all maintained within the compliance department, but it's mainly maintained within Broward Health.
But you are cognizant, you're aware of this stuff, and you move forward and try to keep us from paying more penalties and devastating talent.
Correct. That is always the goal. Yes.
I don't have any more questions. You want to give us? Did I get everybody?
Yeah, can I just ask one other question? One quick question?
Yes, of course.
So if you take a step back to when you assumed this role, and you were out asking questions, interviewing employees for issues then versus now, have you seen a change in the organization? What's that impact been, and how has that changed your job and your day-to-day function of getting information, identifying problems or not problems if they turn out not to be, or if they turn out to be? And have you noticed a change in working in the organization at all?
Yes. I mean, I have. From the time that I came in, even prior to taking over the role as the interim when I came in 2015. And I even spoke a little bit about it on Monday at the compliance committee. I truly do feel that it's night and day. And in regards to getting things done. Before it was talking about things for months and months and months and saying, okay, let's get this done, and then nothing ever came of it. And that makes your job extremely difficult, right? Because the chief compliance officer, I don't have the power to force anyone to do anything, right? None of these people report to the chief compliance officer. You rely on senior leadership, right? You got to get that buy-in from the senior leadership of like, this is what needs to be done, and this is why it needs to be done. And then working with them to say, okay, well, then this is how we can do it, and this is how we can operationalize it. And then you really need that senior leader to then push it, because it's their employees that are then implementing that. And really, that's the biggest change that I've seen since being interim chief compliance officer, is that shift to that. to where then the senior leaderships are pushing that, and things are changing, and things are getting done. As you know, we talk about it, which you have to, but then after we talk about it, we're actually implementing it, and things are changing and being done. And then to me, that's the biggest difference. And it makes the not my job, but everyone that's in the compliance department's job, I think other senior leaders' jobs, much easier to where we're actually moving forward and implementing things.
And I guess this is more of a comment or a quick question. Do you, and you may not want to answer it, I don't know, do you feel that you played a part in getting the senior leadership to buy into your compliance concept and what you're trying to do? I mean, as you being in that role with some consistency and some performance and showing what you've done, you think that's helped get people to respond to you and to the organization in a direction that's been positive in the eyes of the OIG?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely hope so, because I mean, I really do try to work with the senior leaders and take their feedback and be responsive and be available to them. I mean, that was really one of it seemed like a consistent theme coming into the role as interim was, and I've heard it I mean, I think every area you kind of get this, you know, compliance always gets this knock of it's a black hole, right? We report issues and then we never hear anything and nothing ever happens, and I don't think that's unique to Broward Health. I think that's unique to most organizations. But I really have tried to change that mentality. And from some of the feedback that I've received from people, I feel like I have. And I hope everyone feels that way, to where they don't feel like compliance is a black hole. And that if they report issues, it's going to be taken seriously. It's going to be looked into. And it's going to be addressed if it has to be, right? Depending on what we find. And I really do take the mentality of, you know, the chief compliance officer position, it's an important role in any organization. And it takes someone willing to sometimes be willing to walk out the door as well, right? To take those stands of like, this has got to get done. But you need someone that's consistent, and I have really strived to be that consistent person in that role of like, this is the position that, you know, this is the position of the compliance department. This is the position for this issue, regardless of who it involves, right? It doesn't matter, you know, we're not going to take different positions for different people. I mean, I really do feel consistency is the number one thing in any compliance organization, and I really have tried to do that. And I feel that senior leaders, hopefully, have a different opinion of compliance now than they did a year ago.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Everybody, you want to give us your closing statement?
Well, I really would like to just say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity that I have been given up to this point. I appreciate the opportunity to sit in front of you today and answer your questions. And like I said, surprisingly, I really have enjoyed doing this job and the challenges that have come with it, and really working to get through those challenges. And I really would like the opportunity to continue to see that through and come out on the other end, to where everyone's job will hopefully be a lot easier, to where we won't be dealing with, you know, always being reactive. And hopefully everyone's workload will go down at that point. So other than that, I really do. I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to interview for the permanent position.
And one thing I want to say to you, and I want to thank you, and I'm sure that my colleagues feel the same way, because I believe that you have been on this job for over now, as an interim, how long now?
A little over a year.
A little over a year, and you never complain about the fact that we never compensated you, and until I guess that we recently talked about it. something fell through the cracks, and so really want to tell you thank you very much, and sorry that happened, but
And then,
it shows that you, in my view, it shows that your dedication to the job was more important than your wallet.
well, it was. I mean, I wanted to get the job done, and that's all that mattered. I mean, there was a lot of work, and we just needed to get the job done. And then, you know, and I don't want to sit up here and act like I'm the only person doing that either. I mean, there's a lot of people here at Broward Health that's helping get that job done.
I know that. A lot of good people out there.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just reach.
When it was actually adjusted. Does that make sense?
So if he's eligible for an adjustment for the
I
year.
don't know when that it would
or
be.
the year and a half.
The same.
That it starts from the time that we should have compensated him rather than today.
Absolutely agree.
Since we're leaving the compensation the same, which I share I agree with that.
All right.
Okay, so can I entertain a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll move to maintain Mr. Harfield's compensation as permanent chief compliance officer, the same as his compensation as interim chief compliance officer, with a effective date of the date at which he originally assumed the responsibilities of interim chief compliance officer.
So do I hear your second?
Second.
Any discussion? No discussion, no. Motion carries, okay? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we adjourn.